There's a moment in life we don't talk about enough, the silent heartbreak of losing someone who truly cared about us, not because they walked away too soon, not because they didn't love us, but because our ego wouldn't let them stay. You see, ego whispers things like, I don't need anyone. I'm fine on my own. If they care, they'll prove it again. Ego thrives on distance, on walls, on pride. And for the avoidant, ego becomes a shield that says, if I don't let them in too close, they can't hurt me. But here's the cruel irony. The very person they push away is often the one who wanted nothing more than to love them for who they are. I've seen this play out countless times. Someone finally meets that rare person, the one who sees past their flaws, who doesn't get scared off by their silence, who actually stays when others would leave. And yet, instead of opening up, they retreat further, mistaking care for threat, mistaking vulnerability for weakness. And then the day comes when that caring person has no more energy to give, not because they stopped loving, but because love without reciprocity becomes exhaustion. They quietly walk away, not with anger, but with heartbreak. That's when ego suddenly goes silent, and the avoidant is left with a bitter truth. They didn't lose just anyone. They lost the one person who actually cared enough to break through the walls. Here's the lesson: ego can keep you safe, but it cannot keep you loved. Safety without intimacy is loneliness. Pride without vulnerability is isolation. And the cost of clinging to ego is often the very connection we claim we want. If this resonates with you, if you recognize yourself in the avoidant, or maybe you've loved one, remember this care is rare. When someone truly sees you, values you, and stands by you, that's not the time to retreat. That's the time to lean in. Because one day, if you don't, ego won't just cost you a relationship. It will cost you the one heart that genuinely wanted to stay. Ego builds walls that protect, but also isolate. At first glance, that sounds like a contradiction, but it's the exact truth of how ego operates in our relationships. Ego is that voice inside that says, don't let them get too close. Don't let them see you vulnerable. Don't give them the power to hurt you. It convinces us that distance is safety, that control is strength. And in many ways, there is a certain comfort in that. When you build walls high enough, nobody can really touch you. No one can see your wounds. No one can reject the parts of you that you've decided are too messy or unlovable. On the surface, ego feels like the perfect shield. But what ego doesn't tell you is that the shield cuts both ways. Yes, it keeps danger out, but it also keeps care out. The person who approaches with genuine love, who wants nothing more than to connect, is met with the same walls as someone who might harm you. The avoidant often can't tell the difference because ego doesn't deal in nuance. It deals in defense. If the choice is between potential rejection and guaranteed control, ego will always choose control. And so the walls get reinforced. What happens over time is that the person behind those walls begins to confuse loneliness with independence. They tell themselves they're fine, they don't need anyone, they're better off relying on themselves. That narrative works for a while. It creates a sense of pride, even superiority, as if not needing anyone makes them stronger than those who openly crave connection. Yet deep down, beneath that polished surface, there's a quiet ache. Because no matter how much we convince ourselves otherwise, we are wired for connection. We are meant to be seen, known, and cared for. And walls, while they protect, also starve us of that very thing. The tragedy is that when someone truly caring comes along, someone who tries to scale those not to harm, but to embrace, ego reacts the same way it always has. Don't trust this. Don't get used to this. Don't let them in. So instead of leaning into the warmth being offered, the avoidant retreats further, proud of how well they can keep their guard up. To them, the wall is safety. To the caring person on the outside, the wall is rejection. They knock, they wait, they show patience, but eventually they realize that no matter how much they care, they cannot love someone who refuses to be let in. And here lies the painful paradox. The wall did its job. It kept the person safe from potential hurt. But in doing so, it also kept them from love. It created isolation, not because no one cared, but because ego never allowed care to cross the threshold. The wall that was meant to protect became the very prison that ensured they stayed alone. The avoidant often mistakes care for threat and retreats further. This is one of the most painful dynamics to witness, both for the person experiencing it and for the one trying to love them. To the avoidant, affection feels unfamiliar, sometimes even unsafe. They have conditioned themselves to expect disappointment, abandonment, or rejection whenever intimacy shows up. So when someone leans in with genuine care, instead of receiving it as love, they perceive it as pressure, as a looming danger that will inevitably end in pain. Their instinct is to withdraw, not because they don't want love, but because love feels like a risk too heavy to take. Imagine someone reaching out a hand to help you across a fragile bridge. To most people, that hand is a gift, a reassurance that you won't fall. To the avoidant, however, the hand feels like an attempt to control their steps, to limit their freedom, to put them in a position where they could stumble in front of someone else. Care feels like exposure. Vulnerability feels like weakness. And so they pull back, thinking they are protecting themselves, when in reality they are pushing away the very thing they secretly crave. This retreat can take many forms. Sometimes it's physical distance, spending less time with the person who is showing affection. Sometimes it's emotional distance, becoming quieter, more closed off, less responsive. Sometimes it's defensive behavior, sarcasm, dismissiveness, even irritation at small gestures of love. The avoidant tells themselves, I need space. But what they are really doing is creating a buffer against feelings they don't yet know how to process. They believe if they stay in control, they won't get hurt. What they don't see is that their retreat communicates rejection to the other person, even when rejection was never the intention. From the outside, this can be devastating to watch. A partner or friend may be offering nothing but care, small acts of kindness, words of reassurance, patient presence. But instead of being received, these gestures land as pressure. The avoidant interprets them as signs they are being asked to give more than they're ready for, or that expectations are building, or that their independence is being threatened. In their mind, the caring person is on the verge of demanding too much, and the safest thing to do is retreat before they feel trapped. What the avoidant doesn't realize is that the person offering care isn't asking for perfection. They are simply asking to be let in, to be trusted with a little bit of vulnerability. And here's the cruel twist: the more the avoidant retreats, the more the caring person feels unappreciated, unseen, and shut out. The very gestures of love that were meant to build connection end up triggering fear instead. So the avoidant withdraws further, misinterpreting love as danger, and in doing so, creates the very distance that makes real connection impossible. They don't mean to punish the one who cares, but by mistaking care for threat, they unintentionally push away the love they needed most. The caring person eventually leaves, not out of lack of love, but out of exhaustion. At the beginning, their heart is full of hope. They see the avoidance walls, but they believe that with patience and consistency, those walls can come down. They sense the goodness beneath the defenses, the softness that rarely shows itself, and they are willing to wait for it. For a time, their love feels strong enough to carry the imbalance. They give more, they reassure more, they initiate more, believing that eventually the other person will meet them halfway. But love without reciprocity becomes draining. The caring person begins to notice the small rejections, the silences that stretch too long, the moments of coldness that follow their attempts at closeness. They tell themselves, it's not about me, they just need time, they're scared, and they keep giving because that's what love does. It tries. Yet, no matter how pure their intentions, no one can endlessly pour into a well that never seems to fill. The effort that once came from a place of abundance starts to chip away at their own emotional reserves. Exhaustion in love is rarely loud. It's not usually marked by big arguments or explosive fights. It's quieter than that. It's the slow fading of energy, the subtle dimming of enthusiasm. Where once they eagerly reached out, now they hesitate. Where once they offered reassurance freely, now they pause, wondering if their words even matter. Where once they fought to stay, now they quietly question if they are simply prolonging their own heartbreak. The weight of giving without receiving creates a fatigue that no amount of love can mask. It's important to understand that this leaving isn't born out of a lack of care. In fact, it's the opposite. They leave precisely because they cared too much for too long without being cared for in return. They loved so deeply that they kept pushing through their own unmet needs until finally their heart could no longer carry the imbalance. Their departure is not an abandonment, it's a form of self-preservation. It's the recognition that love should not be one-sided, that intimacy requires two people leaning in, not one endlessly reaching while the other retreats. For the avoidant, this leaving can feel like confirmation of their worst fears. They think, see, people always go. I was right not to trust. But what they often fail to see is that the caring person didn't go because they stopped loving. They went because they had nothing left to give. They were running on empty, and even the strongest heart cannot survive in perpetual deprivation. The avoidant believes the departure proves love is unreliable, when in truth, it only proves that even the most patient and loving person cannot thrive in a relationship where their care is continually met with distance. And so the caring person leaves quietly, carrying their love with them, grieving not just the relationship, but the potential of what could have been if the walls had come down. Their exhaustion is not a failure of love. It is the inevitable result of giving endlessly into a space that never opened to receive. Losing the one who truly cared is a deeper pain than being left by anyone else. Most of us go through relationships where the other person wasn't really invested, where it was clear that their heart wasn't fully in it. When those connections end, it stings, but it doesn't shatter us. We grieve the idea of what could have been more than the actual loss of the person. But when the person who leaves is the one who saw us at our worst and still stayed, the one who chose us despite our walls, our moods, our silences, that loss cuts far deeper. It feels different because it is different. There's a unique kind of heartbreak that comes from realizing that the one person who cared enough to fight for you, to understand you, to see past your defenses, is gone, not because they didn't love you, but because they could no longer keep pouring themselves into a void. The mind replays every moment when they reached out with tenderness, every time they tried to get closer, every gesture of patience. And suddenly, those moments don't just look like kindness anymore, they look like opportunities that were wasted. Each memory becomes a reminder of love that was offered and love that wasn't allowed in. What makes this kind of loss so painful is that it forces the avoidant to confront a truth they've spent their whole lives trying to escape. Care is not infinite. Even the most devoted person has limits. And when those limits are crossed, love doesn't necessarily vanish, but presence does. And once the person who cared is gone, there is no guarantee of finding another who will show up in the same way. That kind of devotion is rare. Losing is like misplacing something priceless, only to realize later it cannot be replaced. The depth of the pain comes not just from missing the person, but from recognizing what their presence represented. They were proof that love was possible, that someone could see through the cracks and still want to stay. Their leaving doesn't just create absence, it creates a vacuum where hope used to live. For the avoidant, it confirms their deepest fear, that no one will stay, but with a cruel twist. This wasn't just anyone leaving. This was the one person who actually wanted to. And that makes the loneliness feel heavier, the regret sharper, the silence more unbearable. In the quiet that follows, the avoidant often finds themselves haunted not by the idea of being alone, but by the memory of the one they pushed away. Every smile, every reassuring word, every time that person showed up despite being kept at a distance becomes a reminder of what was lost. And unlike casual relationships that fade without much weight, this loss lingers. It lingers because it wasn't inevitable. It could have been different. And that knowledge that they had something real, something rare, and lost it not because of lack of love, but because of their own walls, is what makes the pain unlike any other. True connection requires vulnerability. Without it, ego will cost you love. Vulnerability is the bridge between two hearts, the space where intimacy breathes and grows. It is not about grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It is about allowing another person to see the parts of us we usually keep hidden. That means letting them witness our fears, our insecurities, and our flaws, not just the polished version we show to the world. Without that openness, a relationship may have moments of closeness, but it will never have depth. It becomes two people standing side by side, but never truly intertwining. The challenge is that vulnerability feels risky. To open up is to hand someone the power to hurt us, to risk rejection, to risk being misunderstood. Ego steps in to protect us from those risks, whispering, "Don't show too much. Don't rely on them. Don't let them see how much you care." Ego convinces us that strength is found in detachment, that if we reveal too little, we stay in control. And in the short term, that control feels safe. But over time, it creates a barrier that love cannot cross. A connection without vulnerability is like a plant without water. It might exist for a while, but it will never truly flourish. The irony is that the very thing we avoid, being vulnerable, is what creates the closeness we deeply crave. Vulnerability is not weakness, it is courage. It takes courage to say, "I need you." It takes courage to admit, "I'm scared." It takes courage to reveal, "This matters to me." Those moments of honesty are where bonds are formed, where love takes root, where trust is built. Without them, relationships remain surface level, and surface level love cannot withstand the storms of life. When ego is prioritized over vulnerability, the cost is often love itself. The avoidant may protect themselves from feeling exposed, but they also protect themselves from feeling deeply connected. They may avoid the discomfort of being seen, but they also avoid the beauty of being fully known. Over time, partners who long for intimacy grow wary of trying to connect through walls. They crave reciprocity, a glimpse into the heart of the one they love. And when that never comes, they eventually stop trying. It is tempting to believe that withholding vulnerability keeps us safe, but the reality is that it keeps us alone. True safety in love doesn't come from walls, it comes from trust. It comes from believing that someone can see the real you and still choose to stay. Vulnerability is the invitation that makes that possible. Without it, even the strongest attraction, the deepest compatibility, the rarest bond cannot survive. Love needs space to enter, and that space is only created when ego steps aside and vulnerability is allowed to take its place. When ego builds walls, when fear turns care into threat, and when silence pushes away love, the result is always the same: we end up alone, not because love was never there, but because we refused to let it in. The truth is, the greatest tragedy is not being unloved. It's losing the one who truly cared because we were too guarded to receive it. If there's one thing to take away, it's this: vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is the soil where love grows. Ego may keep you safe, but it will never keep you fulfilled. And when someone rare comes along, someone who sees you, values you, and chooses to stay despite your flaws, don't let fear push them away. Lean in, open up, because care like that is not promised twice. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your openness to hear this message. My hope is that these words remind you not to wait until it's too late to show the people who care that you care back. Until we meet again, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember, the cost of ego is always higher than the price of vulnerability. Thank you and goodbye.